Conversations across time, conversations across time, conversations across time, conversations across.
Good evening. Welcome to Conversations Across Time. This is the second in a series that we are calling Scapegoating, Fascism and White Supremacy. My guest returning this week is show historian Mark Hoffman.
Great to be back, and this is a very, very important topic.
Mark, you know, one of the reasons that I so much enjoy our little conversations is that we are able to give some information, and you just have such an interesting take on it as a history teacher. And the things that you were subjected to, and the textbooks that they tried to force upon you that were revisionist in nature.
Yes, definitely. When I started teaching history, and I taught black, I was I don't want to brag, but I was the first person in Philadelphia to teach black history.
That's not bragging, that's just truth.
The textbooks were awful. Even some of the cartoons in the textbooks depicted African Americans in a very, very negative way, barbarians, animals. There was no mention of Ida B. Wells, of W.B. Du Bois, of Langston Hughes, of
oh my goodness,
Paul Robeson, and many of the books were, you know, it was Philadelphia, so we didn't have up-to-date books anyway. There was no mention of Dr. King.
Oh. Yeah,
there's no mention of Dr. King, and again, it was this typical, stereotypical adaptation of what history should have been, and they made it the way they wanted the kids to think about black people in terms of their role in society, how white people would view them, and the superiority of, quote unquote, the white race.
And to perpetuate these myths.
Right, and that goes right through Reconstruction,
yes,
right up to the present day, and they're doing the same thing now, and it's the same type of propaganda. You have the movies.
Yes.
Up until, as we said on the last show, up until the 50s, blacks were Step and Fetching. You had Amos and Andy. You had Birth of a Nation. You had Gone with the Wind and Hattie McDaniel and Butterfly McQueen, all subservient blacks. So we are, and also that the benevolent, paternal Southern male and nice Southern lady who treated these people wonderfully when they really didn't. And it's happening now, because when people say, like, what are minorities complaining about?
Yes.
It's almost the same thing that they talked about. Well, you have a place to live, you have a roof over your head. So,
you know,
and the thing is, there was a time when the country wanted to really try to make this to fulfill the goal of the Declaration of Independence, all men created equal. And the time we could have done it was right after the Civil War.
After the Civil War. That was the time. That was the time to do it. It's the time to do it.
We had the opportunity, as you were mentioning, about the Enforcement Acts, and you can.
Yeah, the Enforcement Acts were 3 bills from 1870 to 1871. There are 3 bills guaranteeing to African Americans the right to vote, the right to hold office, the right to participate in society, and equal protection. The reason that I want you to understand the Enforcement Acts is that in 1873, there on Easter Sunday, April 13th, 1873, on Easter Sunday, in Colfax, Louisiana, there was after a very heated gubernatorial race in which there was a Republican declared as the winner over against a Democrat, John McCurney, who was reported to have won that election. There was a dispute about it. And Colfax, Louisiana, was a small town in Louisiana where there was a black militia.
Right.
And the Southern wealthy plantation owners armed former Confederate soldiers and former Union soldiers. And they marched on Colfax for the purpose of securing the town courthouse. And there was a massacre, and over 150 black people were slaughtered. First of all, when they had cannon, they had superior weapons to the black militia. And this was a massacre because they were upset over William Kellogg becoming the governor of Louisiana. It was a horrible massacre, but what you have to look at is Colfax in 1873 emboldened the Ku Klux Klan,
Right.
the White League, the red shirts. They were all emboldened by Colfax because that matter of Colfax, there were 3 individuals that were brought to trial, acquitted. This matter went up to the Supreme Court of the United States, and the Supreme Court of the United States held that the equal protection that was guaranteed under the 14th Amendment didn't apply in this case because these were individual actors and not the state. But Colfax, there are other massacres that we'll talk about, but Colfax is what emboldened.
But also in 1873, there was an economic depression or panic, what they call them panics then. And combining those elements, we start to see rebellion against the radical Republicans.
Yes.
And in the off-year elections, the Democrats win, and that even enables the Klan to grow even bigger. And now we start to get the Klan really, really getting strong throughout the South. And in fact, by the time Rutherford B. Hayes withdraws the troops from the South, you cannot get elected in the South unless you can prove you have some kind of tie to the Klan. And by that time, the South becomes what they call the solid South, and it was all Democrats in rebellion against the Republic. And it was that way until Nixon's strategy and Ronald Reagan.
Yes.
So it's almost 100 years that you didn't even have to worry about winning an election. All you had to do in the South was win the Democratic primary.
And you were going to win.
And all of them had ties to the Klan. I mean, we did a show with
I'd be willing to say, what was your motivation when you saw everyone else running away from the fire that you actually ran towards it?
Because I grew up with these people. This has been my community since I was born. I was born to slaves. And you have to remember that I did what I did because I felt that it was my responsibility to make sure that I am getting this information as a publisher, even as a person, to make sure that I am getting this information out here. Because if everyone is running away from the fire, that means nobody is telling the truth. Nobody is reporting that these acts, these lynchings are happening to men that most times have not created one crime. That they are being dragged out of their houses, they are being dragged out of their stores, for political reasons, they are being hung by trees while people stand there and watch.
It's almost like a
their
circus.
children.
Yes.
Ida B. Wells, and we talked about all that, the people that did the acts, and the Klan and the lynching. I know Ida, she talked about the lynching.
She exposed the lynching.
And she did the newspapers, articles about the lynching, and the people that wanted to glorify the South even denied the lynching. You could show people a picture of an African American being hung from a tree, and they would deny, well, he must have done something, or he raped a white woman, and the people were just being lynched for no reason at all, no trial. And the Klan was so strong that you couldn't get elected, as I said, without bragging. I was a member of the Klan.
And I want to say this for anyone that is confused. The Ku Klux Klan is a paramilitary organization. It's a terrorist organization. And during the time that we're speaking of, it was aligned with the Democratic Party. The Ku Klux Klan was an arm of the Democratic Party.
Grant thought it was a terrorist organization, and in my opinion, it should be listed along with Al Qaeda and ISIS.
Yes,
To my
absolutely.
opinion, but Grant did have it listed as a terrorist organization. And what happened was, once they got their way, once Jim Crow was
my
established, once they took the rights, 15th Amendment rights away by intimidation,
And
by violence, by literacy tests, by all the methods
Poll
of voter
taxes, grandfather clause.
all of those methods, they still were his Klan, they still had their meetings, but they really had nothing to fight for until after World War One.
Yes.
And after World War One, the Klan started to grow much larger again, and maybe one of the reasons was Woodrow Wilson
Yes.
showed the birth of a nation in the White House, and it became, I guess, one of the
Acceptable?
most popular movies.
Yes.
And Griffin was considered one of the
D.W.
great
Griffith,
directors.
great director. That's
Great
what they
direct- And then you had the immigrants coming into this country, and you had a lot of socialists. Don't forget that
Yes.
the Russian Revolution took place, so they
just as the German aristocracy was afraid of
right,
communism,
right.
Bolshevik revolution, it's exactly what was going on in this country.
And a lot of people said any foreigners, an anarchist or a communist, especially if they come from Eastern Europe, and the Klan started to grow in numbers, but they expanded their hatred. Now they didn't just hate African Americans; they hated Jews,
Yes.
Catholics, anybody from a Eastern European country that wasn't a Protestant, and it really grew. I mean, it was unbelievable. In the election in the Democratic Convention in 1924,
Oh, my.
the Klan backed a candidate. I think his name was McAfee from California, and he almost got nominated. That election was between him and the governor
Al Smith
from New York, and they hated Al Smith because he was Catholic. He was an Irish Catholic. But anyway, they couldn't get the nominated candidate. There were 120 ballots at the Democratic Convention. I believe the convention was in New York, and they finally agreed to John Davis, and he got swamped by Calvin Coolidge. But the Klan showed its power because they stymied
marched. They
the
marched.
election of Al Smith, and in 24 and 28. They marched, and in 1928, their march on Washington, there were 50,000 Klan members
In Klan garb.
marching down Pennsylvania Avenue. And I should also mention that Donald Trump's
please.
father, Fred, was involved in a Klan rally
In New York.
Queens, New York.
That's right.
In 1927, at the time, the height of the Klan
Klan
rebirth.
expansion.
They call it the Klan rebirth.
Okay.
And he was arrested with 8 other people and charged with disorderly conduct. And Donald Trump said it was fake news, but there are New York Times articles where his name is
Yes,
in the
and
article.
that's what Mark.
Maybe
I want
that's why he hates
let's
the New York
underline
Times
that.
today. I don't know.
That's probably why he hates the New York Times today. But let us please make absolutely certain that our audience hears that. Donald Trump's father was arrested as a result of being a participant and he was a member of the Ku Klux Klan. As a result of a Ku Klux Klan rally, he was arrested, and he certainly was not out there demonstrating against the Klan. So, you've got somebody sitting in the Oval Office right now. He can deny as much as he wants. He is who he is. So I just wanted us to underline. I'm sorry I interrupted you, but that is something that we need to talk about.
Well, what's happening is, and again, there were, let's be honest, during Reconstruction, there were some significant gains made. Like you
Yes.
said, the 13th, 14th, 15th Amendment, the enforcement, all of that. Now, we reverted. That was all wiped out, that they were successful.
Yes.
50s, especially the 60s and 70s, tremendous gains in civil rights were made.
Yes.
The same forces that emerged during Reconstruction to roll back the gains are now emerging. They're out in the open. We see them. They want to roll back.
Without their hoods.
Yes, because we have a chief executive who, in his own way, thinks it's okay for these people to be out there and advocate. So they're trying to roll back. And as we said on one of the early shows, they wanted to reestablish the old Southern way of white supremacy. That's all they want. And that's what they want now. When they say, bring this country back, what are they talking about?
That's right.
They're talking about we wanted the way that the whites were supreme, that a black man couldn't walk down the street and look a white woman in the eye on the same sidewalk. They would, and I know that's an extreme, but they would like to go back to that. And that's what the fight is now. And they even extended it, as we said, the Klan extended it to immigrants. They do the same things now.
Aren't they talking about immigrants now? Aren't we
the
here?
same thing, and they're saying the same thing. They're not as smart. They're rowdy. They're
Well, what did
crime.
Trump's announcement. Trump's announcement.
Right, the Mexicans. That's and
they're bad people. They're very bad
their
people.
Culture's crime infested. Yes. The same stereotypes that they perpetuated against African Americans, that Hitler perpetuated against Jews. That we're going to do another show. All the same tactics. Right to scapegoating. And in the past, we had one of the contributors to the show, Dr. Adler, who talked about once you dehumanize the other, it's easy to do anything to them. And that's kind of what happened during Reconstruction with the emergence of the Klan. And I'm afraid it's happening again. And I would hate to see the gains made. And they weren't, it wasn't perfect.
Oh, no.
But to roll them back and to go back to where we were before 1950, that the years between 1877 and World War II, I mean, to me, that's unconscionable.
Well, it's unconscionable, and one of the things that we haven't had a chance to talk about, we sort of mentioned it last week when we were talking about the Panic of 1873. Southern plantation owners invested very heavily in railroad stock. And that was subsidized by the United States government because during Reconstruction it was thought that the railroads would be what would salvage the South and bring it out of its economic depression. It was a way to rebuild. And a lot of Southerners invested in railroad stock. And there was so much chicanery that happened around the expansion of the railroads in this country. And what you saw was the government subsidizing these wealthy plantation owners by, in fact, having them be invested in railroads. So that led to the Panic of 1873. It was railroad speculation. And the reason that becomes important is because the South was so poor. And when there's poverty, you look around, as Dr. Adler said, for the other.
Scapegoat.
Got to scapegoat someone, which is why we're calling this series Scapegoating.
I feel it really interesting what you said about subsidizing the railroads, because the very people that rise up in anger because the government helps a poor woman with a couple kids with welfare, and they say, well, you know, we have to believe in free enterprise and laissez-faire. We're more than willing
pull yourself up by your bootstraps
to subsidize the railroads and have oil sauce. So I really find that amusing. I mean, you know, they talk about welfare. For every welfare recipient in the city, there's corporate welfare that's 20 times greater in this country.
Absolutely.
And you know, nobody wants. I mean, they all want to say government stay out, Ayn Rand and all this stuff, stay out, and say
how misled are those people?
Every man for himself, but they don't. It's you for yourself and help me.
Yes, absolutely.
But the thing is, and again. The same things are going on now, the dehumanizing of minorities, the other, us versus the other.
DACA, oh my God.
That same thing, and how is that different than breaking up a family during slavery and selling the kids? It's the same.
What is the difference?
It's the same kind of concept, the same mental set that would do that. People that would think it's all right to send these kids back were the same people that would have no compunction about slavery's okay and it's all right to break up the family and send the kids anywhere. It's the same mindset.
Yes.
It's not slavery, but it's the same mindset.
It's the same. It's the same white supremacist mindset.
Right, and we have to stop it now, because when it grows, as you see after Reconstruction, as they got more powerful, they were able to gain control of the governments and then pass laws, and it's hard to overturn laws.
Yes.
And then,
yes.
I mean, you get a Supreme Court that rules separate but equals okay.
Yes. Yes.
And Plessy versus Ferguson. It's perfectly all right to separate. It's right out of what the Southerners wanted. You know, we're superior. We don't want to associate with you, except when you can do us some good and make us some money. Other than that, please stay the hell away.
Yeah. And by withdrawing when you mentioned the Compromise of 1877, that was when Rutherford B. Hayes became the President of the United States. He hadn't really won the popular vote, but
electoral votes were disputed.
Votes were disputed, but in order to, you got the Southern Dixiecrats to go along with it because there was a backroom deal. And the backroom deal was that the federal troops will be withdrawn from the South.
And let you have the South. You can do whatever you want.
And you can do whatever, well, you can do whatever you want.
Yep.
I asked earlier when we were talking about the Grant administration, because Ulysses Grant really, was very successful in quelling and putting down the Ku Klux Klan.
Yeah, he thought they were a terrorist group.
He defined them as a terrorist group, and just as you said, no different from Al Qaeda and ISIS. I mean, very, very much along the same lines. But when Hayes became the president, and Hayes will be on next week, one of our guests is going to be Rutherford Hayes, and we'll get to ask him when the backroom deal was made. I mean, because just as you said, he could have done what Trump would do. He could have made the deal, and once he became the president, said, "I'm not going to abide by it."
Wasn't in writing; it was secret.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. So there was no reason that he could not have simply decided not to.
Might add another civil war. The South might have wanted to fight again.
Well, we would have gotten it over with by then.
Yeah, but I think they were spent. You know, so I
Yes.
don't think they could afford. So but. Other than, but they did threaten that. Some of them threatened that if, that they were going to march on it, if.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
I mean, I think that that ended Reconstruction, and in many things, politics took the place of morality. So.
Yeah. Politics took the place of morality, and then there's something else about Grant. Grant sort of lost his taste. I mean, the northern whites made the decision that they were tired of quelling the skirmishes, as they refer to them, that were occurring in the South. But we never will know what would have happened if Grant had agreed to run for a second term.
Right.
But Rutherford B. Hayes came into position already saying to the South, let's make a deal. And isn't that the occupant of the Oval Office right now? He prides himself, he talks about
the art of the deal.
The art of the deal. The art of the deal. So we see that we've come full circle, but
Hayes dealt with the segregationists, the Democrats in the South for his own political gain, and I think Trump's doing the same thing.
yes.
I mean, he's appealing to the segregation. They are segregationists, but the alt-right and
Yes.
the white supremacists and the members of the Klan.
And the neo-Nazis.
The neo-Nazis, because that's his political base, and he's appealing to them. That's more important, as we said, than the morality of what's right or wrong. So, I mean, the thing that troubles me is that Reconstruction could have been a success. It was rolled back, and it was 100 years, round figures, of
Yes.
purposeful discrimination,
Murder.
prejudice, murder, lynching,
Yes.
and then we had the civil rights movements of the late 50s, 60s, and 70s, and I'm just afraid it'll get rolled back again, and that's what I would think we have to fight against at this point, and checking it every time. We can't be, let's put it this way, we can't be Hayes and compromise the morality for the political gain.
There is no compromise on morality.
I agree with that. Yeah, absolutely.
Now, I want to, next week, as I said, we're going to have President Rutherford B. Hayes here, and we've got some hard questions for him to ask about the Compromise of 1877. We're also going to have Countess Berthold returning as the good German, because she has something to say about the analogy between what is happening now, what happened in Germany, and what happened during Reconstruction. I mean, it's just amazing the way that history is cyclical. That's why we love history on this show, because we're dedicated to history and in examining history, because it does tell you a lot about what's going on today. But I want to throw out just a little throwaway to you, Mark, and that is, there has always been this myth about the Southern, about black men raping the fair white woman, and their desire. Now, I've often wondered, as an African American woman, does that have anything to do with the notion that these Southern white aristocrats used to tip down to the slave quarters? I mean, are they actually projecting their own sexual desires?
So you're saying it was all right for the glorious, chivalrous Southern males to have sexual relations with
black women,
with their slaves?
Yes.
But they were afraid the black men might have sex with their.
The black men harbored the same kind of notions towards their women that they harbored towards black women. I mean, that's just controversial thing I want to throw out there.
My guess is probably that the black men there was probably less than 1% of what you will call any kind of relations between black men and white women, and I don't know what the percentage was, but I would guess it's 30-40% between the white men and the black women. So yeah, it might be projection.
I mean, I think of it as projection because one of the things in the horrors that the black men were lynched, but many of them were castrated before they were lynched. And that's a very
Birth of a Nation. That's when you see this.
That's a theme.
Right. This strong black man, and then he's running after that, and the Klan's going to protect her. So that's part. I mean, but that's all as Dr. Adler, all the minority groups that they want to discriminate, they use the same tactics. The men are Hitler used it about the Jewish men in Germany. You're going to hear it, I'm sure, about
how many Jewish women were raped? How many Jewish women were raped in the concentration camps?
Oh, well, no, I mean, it's the way they depict the other people of being animalistic and not human, and then we have every right to suppress them and even kill them because they're you can't. Yes. They're animals. They can't be controlled. So I mean, it goes right through, and every group, and what kills me and what really ticks me off is every group had the same thing said about it, and this very people that had that type of negativity about their group is willing to project that negativity on another group, and how the Jewish people in Trump's administration are still in his administration.
I don't understand
it blows my mind, but there were Jews in the German army, half Jews, and so.
Well, there's no such thing. If you got a Jewish mother, you're a Jew.
Right, but the dehumanization is a constant, and you could say what you want. People could say I'm too hard on Trump. The one thing he does is dehumanize groups, and he dehumanizes people. So if one thing you can say about him, he understands the psychology of people. He's a great salesman, and he knows that works, and he knows that is how you gain success, by dehumanizing your opponent. And if you want to stymie a group, dehumanize the group. He dehumanized the Mexicans. He dehumanized Little Marco, Lion Hillary. That's all dehumanization. Just apply that to and that's what he's doing now.
What he's doing.
And we have to guard against that. And we have to educate people, and we have to make sure that this doesn't happen. And scapegoating is something that we got to guard against all the time.
May I just say, I want to end on this note. First of all, I want to thank everyone for being here this evening, and I hope you tune in next week. And I want to look into the camera and say to any Jewish person that is serving in the Trump White House, this is a shanta for the mention. That's exactly what it is. You should be ashamed of yourself.
Conversations across time. 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 Conversations across